Hello, one and all. My name is Georgia Satara, and I teach history and gender studies at the University of Victoria. And yesterday, at our annual Let's Talk About Teaching conference, I gave a talk on approaches and tools for centering anti-racism, decolonization, and gender inclusivity in accessibility, relationality, and belonging. And I thought maybe if I recorded it, it might be useful to your practice as well. Let's take a look. I want to begin by acknowledging that this video recording has taken place on the lands of the Wasanich First Nations, composed of 4 nations, the Taut, Charlip, Pakachin, and Tsakum, and 2 Lekwungen First Nations, the Songhees and the Esquimalt. It is my hope that this recording and the lessons contained in it will support and contribute toward justice for Indigenous peoples. In addition, the specific facts of this territory acknowledgement come from the University of Victoria's Native Student Union, NSU, their website. This in itself is meaningful. It places students as experts of their own experience and as knowledge keepers, and my argument is that instructors of all ranks and staff could strengthen our practice, what we know and what we do, through a willingness to learn from our students. I'll return to this important point throughout this talk on approaches and tools for centering anti-racism, decolonization, and gender inclusivity in accessibility, relationality, and belonging. Anti-racism, decolonization, and gender inclusivity are central to creating syllabi and classroom environments that cultivate and foster accessibility, relationality, and belonging. Yet as experts of our own diverse fields, instructors need support to develop our knowledge of both history and theory to better implement and practice these important values. With the challenge of everyone's time constraints in mind, this video lecture will map some key guiding principles for approaching this important work and provide resources, accessible short snapshots of crucial scholarly sources for strengthening our understanding and building our capacity to implement an anti-racist and decolonial teaching mandate. Please let me know about your questions below. I'd love to know what you found useful in this talk, about your challenges and your strategies. Also, email me so we can continue this conversation. Thank you in advance. So, foundational and ongoing colonialism, white supremacy, racism, sexism, transphobia, and ableism frame our current moment. They are the context in which we are all teaching and learning. They are barriers to access, to relationship building, and to belonging, a better understanding of our collective political inheritance, and a commitment to building something far better in its place is our collective responsibility. Wherever you are in your process, take what's useful to you and leave the rest for someone else. It is my hope that this workshop will offer something for your toolkit, even if it's knowing that you're not alone in doing this important work. Thank you. It needs to be said from the outset that while these principles are simple, engaged, wholehearted teaching is hard work. It requires a devotion to the craft and the possibility of rarely getting it just right. We traverse complicated and sensitive terrain, which is always changing. I wouldn't want anyone to think that there's a one and done solution. Our students are varied and have many different, diverse experiences and needs. What works with one group may not work with another group in the same term, let alone across terms. For me, what's most important is to show up, to do the work, because this is important work, and to do my best, always practicing to do better and be better for the love of justice, to work toward a far better world than the one we've got going on right now. Abena Busia, Ghana-born, Oxford-trained professor at Yale and Rutgers, a diplomat, Ghana's ambassador to Brazil, tells a story about a disruption at the African Studies Association Women's Caucus in the early 1990s when Black American feminists called out white American feminists' entitlement. Busia explains that when she first heard the story, she was upset on behalf of the conference's Nigerian hosts. It took living and working in the US for her to shift her position and side with Black American feminists. To understand each other, Busia calls on us to attend to our differential histories. I don't know your story, and you don't know mine. Our assumptions, by simply looking at each other, reveal more about ourselves and the person we are looking at. We may also know very little about the history of the place where we're standing. And even what we do know, we may not agree about how to interpret it. And yet, when we engage with each other, all of these stories frame our exchange. Like a prism, everything is reflected through our differential histories and experiences. They stand between us. We need to learn more about each other in this place to ensure that our exchange does not cause harm and can contribute to a feeling of belonging and to being in good relationship with each other. A few years ago, I taught a brilliant Indigenous student in a history class. They told me they were undertaking a degree in Indigenous studies as a form of harm reduction. The university can be a harmful place. Accessing higher education without being harmed is a crucial issue. We need to make the university, our own classrooms, places that reduce harm and support healing what's broken in the world. One way is to learn and attend to our differential histories. Knowledge and understanding are essential. We need to listen. And when someone tells us we're not doing things well, not to take it personally. This is one of the four agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. We are all excellent students of the culture and have absorbed and assimilated all its lessons, good and bad. So when someone, especially those with less power, a student for instance, tells us that we have it wrong, anything from their nation's history to their pronoun, we need to take a philosophical approach. Ask for time, not to double down, but to consider what the world looks like from their point of view, to respond with grace, care, and integrity. This comes from Patrice Cullors' Abolitionist Handbook. To consider what it might look like to share power. I suggest, like Jay Smooth, that we approach their input as a sign of respect. I'll return to this point in a bit. Professors are experts responsible for their classrooms, no question. At the same time, as experts, there's a sense that those in the front of the class are not learners. And for sure, some professors are not interested in learning or making changes that learning may require. That may not be the case for people who are listening to this recording, but at the same time, possibly we all fall somewhere on the spectrum in our willingness and capacity to learn new things beyond what we already know, or in our abilities to apply the lessons successfully. I do think in general, there is a sense that all of us, including our students, already being knowers is an obstacle to learning. Even some of our students are afraid to speak in class, afraid that they will get it wrong. Consider how being active learners, instructors would model learning for all students. And yet, professors are fully responsible for what happens in their classrooms. Even though students are experts of their own lives, they are also paying learners. Taking on the burden of teaching the class about an issue should not be students' responsibility. Part of the instructor's work then is to be informed, to have an ear to the ground, including what they learn from students, taking up learning opportunities when they show up, rather than assuming that all the learning has already taken place. More than that, instructors need to work to create conditions so that students can approach us with concerns rather than to social media. Part of it is cultivating trust and being trustworthy. Part of it is a willingness to share power. To be clear, I'm not suggesting we bend to our students' will. I have taught for many years. Students consistently complain about the amount of reading I assign. I have not cut the reading. There is a method to my madness, and I am transparent about it. So I'm not saying we should be leaves in the wind of our students' whims. I'm simply saying that an excellent teacher is also an ongoing excellent learner. Lessons show up for us in all kinds of ways, which can strengthen our teaching practice. One way to strengthen our practice is to center anti-racism and decolonization and accessibility, relationality, and belonging. We live in a white supremacist, colonial, heteropatriarchal, ableist society. That means that white, middle-class, straight settlers are privileged as normative. The structures we have inherited and live in were created by those subjects for those subjects. Centering anti-racism and decolonization then requires us to create classrooms that don't reinforce those norms, that challenge those norms, and cultivate a sense of belonging and success for all of those of us who were never meant to survive, let alone thrive in these structures. For instance, we might all know some facts about racism, colonialism, and residential schools. For some of our students, these are not merely social facts or social problems, they are lived experience, what Timothy Stanley calls the texture of life. And students' relationship to these facts is varied and complex. I remember an Indigenous student struggling with faculty and staff wearing orange shirts one September on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Everywhere the student turned, reminders of her father's childhood and its consequences for his and her own life were everywhere as painful reminders without end and without tangible solutions and resolution. Wearing orange shirts is a way to honor children who went to residential schools, but how Indigenous students experience it on a campus on a given day, the impact of it, may not have matched the intention of the mandate to wear orange. And we need to attend to that complexity. We need to listen, be approachable so we can be honored with the stories, figure out how we can care for each other, and create classrooms and learning places that are also places for healing. No one here is to blame for the past, as Abena Busia has argued, but it is everybody's responsibility. How do Indigenous students, students of color, queer and trans students, disabled students experience our classrooms? What can we do to attract those students and bolster their success, including by measuring our success by their success? Like Adrienne Maree Brown in We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice, what I know best are the questions. I don't have the answers. All I know is that we need to work together to develop answers and to practice. We need to build relationships that support our collective well being and success while creating a better world and a better future. And the fact is that we do this work in a context of hierarchy, competition, silos of classrooms, disciplines, faculties, and everyone with more work than time. And we have to cultivate relationality and belonging in a context of 50 and 80-minute classes, sandwiched between other classes, administrative duties, various other tasks, while needing to learn our differential histories. And that's not even talking about what's going on for each of us in our private and personal lives. So, how do we do this work? We generate compassion for ourselves and for others, use loving speech, listen, attend to each other's needs, and share power, strategies, and space. We need to engage in new and ongoing learning, including updating lectures to better reflect current cutting edge developments in our fields. It takes work, commitment, heart, energy, and it's worth it for all the students we care for, nurture, nourish, hold them up so that they could reach the finish line and help launch them into the world. Our students are the future. Our work really matters. One of my key strategies has been teaching with love and loving kindness. Inspired by the principles of attitudinal healing, which incidentally were introduced to me by a student 20 years ago, Love Not Fear is an invitation to my students to approach the material and each other from a place of love. My key teachers on this topic are Thich Nhat Hanh and Bell Hooks. In All About Love, Hooks define love as a verb. Rather than a feeling, love is an action. It's a way of being in the world, a way of doing. According to Hooks, love is a combination of trust, commitment, care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility. Love includes affection and recognition, honest and open communication, and truth telling, defined as, quote, seeing ourselves and the world the way it is rather than the way we want it to be, unquote. For Hooks, love allows us to confront these negative realities in a manner that is life-affirming and life-enhancing. Most recently, I'm inspired by Adrienne Maree Brown's We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice and her heart-centered call to build our capacity and skill because, as she argues, quote, our smallest choices today will be our next norms, unquote. Imagine our classrooms being flooded with life-affirming principles and practices as a way of ending cycles of harm, as Brown suggests. I agree with her that, quote, the future is already alive in each of us and that we're co-creating the future with each other, with each action, and with our attention, unquote. Our teaching practice, in its simplest actions, helps to make the world. Michelle Alexander's analysis of racism, and we can apply it to colonialism, is useful in anchoring our discussion. Alexander argues most people today are not racist in the way most people have come to understand the term. These systems of control and power today work less as outright spoken hostile bigotry. They're woven into the system, colonial and racist ideologies underpin the system, but they're not articulated in blatant ways by the liberal center. In addition to the ways these systems benefit and privilege that liberal center, Alexander proposes that these systems function on indifference, defined as a lack of care and a lack of compassion. And she asks us to consider, who do we care about? To paraphrase W.E.B. Du Bois, as quoted in Alexander, the burden belongs to all of us, and the hands of none are clean if we do not bend our energies to righting these great wrongs. For Alexander, the answer is care, compassion, concern. And when we take a quick glance at the dictionary definition of care, we see that it's defined as the provision of what is necessary for health, welfare, maintenance, and protection of someone or something, serious attention or consideration applied to doing something correctly, or to avoid damage or risk, to attach importance to something, to look after and provide for the needs of. So, do you see how this definition of care is so much action-based, like love for Hooks? Provision, serious attention, consideration, application, doing, avoiding, attaching, looking after, providing. All of these are action-based. How does care feature in your practice? And Mia Mingus, the disability justice activist, reminds us that access isn't simply about elevators and other ways of physical access, but what Mingus refers to as, quote, immaterial things, like the trauma of rejection and isolation, unquote. So it's our collective responsibility to show up for each other, to care, to do the work with compassion and grace. And how do we do that? We practice. As Robin DiAngelo explains in her book, Nice Racism, How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm, if we imagine racists are intentionally and openly cruel, then the assumption that follows is that nice people can't be racist. And here she helps us make a useful distinction between kindness, which is active, and niceness, which is performative and does not require action. Indifference isn't merely an individual moral failing, although it is that too. We live in a racist, colonial, white supremacist society where we consume racist ideas all the time. Dismantling harmful systems will require an ongoing practice. Ibram X. Kendi argues that the opposite of racist isn't not racist or non-racist, but anti-racist. Anti-racism requires an active, ongoing commitment. DiAngelo suggests we ask ourselves, quote, how have I been impaired by racist ideas? How do those ideas show up in my interactions? Unquote. One way to strengthen our practice is to keep track of what we learn in the doing and what we will do differently in future. DiAngelo reminds us that, quote, silence from a position of power is a power move, unquote. In this book, DiAngelo offers us many useful insights and suggestions. These include that it takes skill building not to cause harm, that we need to have humility, the humility not to know, and that we demonstrate humility by holding back and listening, building capacity to bear witness to expressions of pain and suffering. Skill building not to cause harm requires ongoing study and accountability, which requires action and practice, remaining open and present. It requires carefulness, thoughtfulness, and awareness of the history we bring to all encounters, consideration of the language we use, being sensitive to group dynamics, being attentive to our patterns and the limits of our understanding. Skill building not to cause harm means checking in with our students rather than assuming who they are, what they need, what's going on. It means modeling, creating, and sustaining alliances across difference by sharing the floor, modeling respect, generating and practicing mutuality. Many things may interfere with doing this work and doing it well. Jay Smoot describes two major stumbling blocks in his TED Talk, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Talking About Race. First, race is a social construct that just doesn't make sense. For more information, I will give you a link to my recorded anti-racist workshop in the text box below. That workshop has an 8-minute history on the term race. Anyway, so he says the term race was created over a few centuries to, quote, rationalize and justify indefensible actions, unquote. Among these are imperialism, theft of land, theft of people, theft of resources, slavery, dispossession, exploitation. So the social construct of race, he says, is designed to trip us up. This is his language. So we are working with a category that's unwieldy, it doesn't make sense. And then, in addition, while we generally recognize that making mistakes is part of being human, when it comes to racism, we often work with a good person, bad person binary. We expect perfection from ourselves, which is an impossible standard. The problem, Smooth argues, with this all or nothing binary of being good or bad person is the faulty assumption that racism is akin to having tonsils. Either you have tonsils or you don't. But that's not how racism works, because we live in a colonial, white supremacist, heteropatriarchal, capitalist society. Mass media, books, knowledge, institutions, structures, ideologies circulate terrible ideas, and we absorb them all because we are excellent students of the culture. So we need to move away from a tonsil removal paradigm, one and done, to a dental hygiene paradigm. Anti-racism is something we need to work on every day, like brushing our teeth. In addition, we need to move away from thinking that being a good person is a fixed characteristic and to shift to seeing being good as a practice that includes engaging with our imperfections. I love this. Smooth says, quote, we are not good despite our imperfections. It's the connection we maintain with our imperfections that allows us to be good to each other and to ourselves, unquote. Lastly, he argues, we should see it as a mark of respect and an act of kindness when someone tells us that we have something racist stuck in our teeth. What happens when we make a mistake? Because we will. For how to apologize, return to the disability justice activist Mia Mingus and her blog, Leaving Evidence, in the post entitled The Four Parts of Accountability and How to Give a Genuine Apology. Mingus calls on us to hold ourselves accountable rather than holding other people accountable or having other people hold us accountable. Mingus writes, holding ourselves accountable means saying something the moment I know I have made a mistake, caused harm or hurt, or acted out of alignment with my values. Again, it's practice, not perfection that we're aiming for. Learning to be accountable when we make mistakes. Skill building at accountability takes practice. So Mingus counsels us to check in with someone before they approach us about our error. Accountability, she writes, is proactive. It's a form of care. It's a way of building trust through vulnerability. It's one way of practicing interdependence, a way to care for others, for ourselves. And within this framework, when we get it wrong, we have opportunities to get it right. And Mingus gives us this accountability in 4 parts: self-reflection, 2, the apology, which she says must involve saying, I'm sorry or I apologize, where we name the harm or the hurt, where we practice clarity and humility, name the impact, not what our intention was, but focus on the impact of our words, actions, or inactions. This is a chance, she says, to practice care, empathy, compassion, to take responsibility by naming our actions and committing to not doing the harm or hurt again. The third part is repair. It has to be done in relationship. You can't do it on your own. It's about making amends, rebuilding trust. It's an opportunity to do the work to be in, quote, right relationship with the self and with others, being in integrity and alignment with our values. And it takes work and time. And number 4, and I think this is really crucial, is changed behavior. The fourth part of accountability requires transforming behavior. We cannot say, I'm sorry, and continue the same behavior. We need to change the way we do things. What happens if you are the one who has been harmed? Patrice Cullors, in an abolitionist handbook, 12 Steps to Changing Yourself in the World, suggests in number 5 to, quote, forgive actively, not passively, unquote. So, as teachers, we work in institutions that inadvertently cause harm, including to ourselves. Here, Cullors is suggesting that we become part of the process of forgiving because it gives the forgiver agency. It works from the principle that, quote, we transform the world by first transforming ourselves, by centering love and transformation. In addition, forgiveness culture feels so much more life affirming with transformative potential than cancel culture. This is particularly meaningful for us in the moment we are finding ourselves in. It also invokes the principle of non disposability. None of us are disposable. Cullors number 7 is also useful for strengthening our teaching practice and circles us back to the centrality of care. Her number 7 is commit to not harming or abusing others. And Cullors names classrooms as a site of practice where we can set an intention not to cause harm. An ideal classroom, quote, is a place where we care for each other, where our goal is to be caring, including for ourselves, a place to practice safety, unquote. Not because practice and learning are safe, but because no one is disposable, and we're all in the process of learning and of becoming, all of us fallible, and in the words of Dorothy Allison, all of us extraordinary. I truly hope the foregoing has been useful to you, inspiring, and has given you some tools to add to your teaching toolkits. In addition to all the emotional labor and concrete action required, we also need knowledge. And I just want to spend a few minutes to direct you to 3 additional sources that I have helped to create. One is a 13-minute recorded YouTube video outlining 11 anti-racist guiding principles. For those principles here, I just want to highlight the importance of language, guiding principle number 2. Language doesn't merely represent or reflect the world, rather, our language choices reflect values, beliefs, trajectories. Language helps to make the world, and we need to be mindful of our language choices and the world we want to bring into being. Timothy Stanley argues that we need to get good at talking about racism without inflicting racist injury, including not recirculating racist stories and not reducing people to the status of victims, which is a form of racism. See guiding principle number 7. I encourage you to listen when you're driving, cooking, or whatever you're doing that requires your hands, but your brain is free to listen. I hope you find this resource useful. Do let me know. I've also created a half an hour YouTube lecture called Anti-Racist Workshop on the history of the idea of race, a theory of racialization, a brief overview of racism and anti-racism. Approximately 8 minutes are devoted to each topic. I hope you'll find this of use as well. The last resource I wanted to talk about today is the Anti-Racist History and Theory website. Students over the last few years in my classes have created fact sheets, taking one or more academic articles and transforming them into usable snapshots, highlighting the author's argument and key points with a focus on what Patricia Hill Collins calls resistant knowledges. This way, a reader can access the argument and most important points of anti-racist decolonial feminist scholarship without having to read hundreds of pages of academic work. The website is searchable by keyword, so I hope you'll use it to explore when you're looking for information to help anchor your practice, to learn more about history, Canadian history, theories of race, colonialism, and as a way of addressing our collective inheritance. I've just, for the fun of it, selected some fact sheets on decolonization and on colonialism, and some on ideas of race and on settler colonialism, just as a way of getting you started. I hope taken together, this lecture and these resources will help strengthen your teaching practice and will help you center anti-racism, decolonization, and gender inclusivity in your classrooms. You know what? The future depends on all of us. Let's try our best to make a positive difference because no matter what we do, we're doing something. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think below in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you.